The airplane cabin buzzed with the usual pre-flight energy as a young couple stepped aboard with their toddler in tow. Their faces displayed a mix of excitement and the exhaustion typical of traveling as a family. The mother gently held the boy's hand, whispering soothing words to keep him calm, while the father carefully maneuvered their luggage down the narrow aisle. Polite yet visibly weary, they settled into their seats near the middle of the plane, offering apologies as they passed other passengers and striving not to inconvenience anyone. A few rows ahead, a flight attendant named Dana observed the boarding process with sharp, focused eyes. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture upright, and her demeanor radiated control. Yet, there was an undercurrent of impatience in her movements, a trait her colleagues had long learned to tread carefully around when she was in one of her moods. The passengers, of course, had no such warning. The family tucked their belongings into the overhead bin, the father placing a small backpack under the seat in front of him. Their toddler squirmed, reaching for the seatbelt clasp, as nearby passengers offered a mix of warm smiles and indifferent glances before returning to their distractions. All seemed routine, the sort of ordinary moments anyone who had flown would recognize. As the plane continued to fill, Dana moved through the cabin, issuing curt nods and brief instructions as needed. When she passed the family, her gaze lingered a moment longer than usual, her eyes narrowing as she watched the father tuck the backpack securely under the seat. Her expression tightened, though she said nothing and moved on. Once the final passengers were seated and the announcements began, Dana's sharp gaze returned to the family. With no warning, she made her way down the aisle and stopped abruptly at their row, her voice firm and loud enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "Sir," she said, addressing the father directly, "did you pick up something that doesn't belong to you during boarding?" The couple exchanged confused glances, the mother clutching her son a little closer. "I'm sorry," the father replied, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" "A wallet," Dana clarified. "It was reported missing in the first few rows. I noticed you handling something earlier. I need to ask if you have it." The murmurs of nearby passengers grew louder as heads turned to watch the interaction. The father, visibly startled, leaned forward. "I don't have a wallet," he said, his voice steady but confused. "I've only touched my own bag." Dana's expression remained unyielding. "Then I need to check," she said. "This isn't negotiable." The mother's face flushed with embarrassment as the father hesitated, instinctively moving his hand toward the backpack under the seat. "You're welcome to look," he said cautiously, "but this feels like a mistake. We didn't take anything." The toddler began to whimper as Dana reached for the bag, her tone unsympathetic. "Mistake or not," she said, "I need to confirm." Reluctantly, the father slid the backpack forward. The mother murmured soft reassurances to their crying child as Dana unzipped the bag with deliberate slowness. Passengers leaned in, some openly staring while others pretended not to watch. The mother's hand trembled slightly as she stroked her son's hair, her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Dana pulled out a set of headphones, a snack wrapper, and a paperback book, rifling through the remaining compartments with mounting impatience. When she finally zipped the bag shut, her face betrayed a flicker of doubt. "There's no wallet," the father said sharply, his frustration barely contained. "I told you we didn't take anything. This is embarrassing for us and for you." Dana straightened, her jaw tightening. "I'll have to speak to the other passengers," she said flatly, refusing to acknowledge her mistake. She turned and marched to the front of the plane, leaving the family in awkward silence, surrounded by the stares of curious strangers. The mother leaned toward her husband, her voice strained. "Why would she think it was us? We didn't do anything." "I don't know," he replied quietly, glancing around the cabin. "But she's not letting this go." Dana stopped at the front of the plane and spoke quietly to a colleague, gesturing toward the cockpit with sharp movements. After a brief exchange, she turned back to the cabin, her expression resolute. "If anyone here has seen a wallet that doesn't belong to them, now is the time to return it," she announced, her voice loud and clipped. "This is your chance to come forward." The cabin fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Passengers exchanged awkward glances, but no one spoke. A man a few rows back muttered loud enough for others to hear. "She's making a scene for nothing." Dana's sharp gaze darted toward him before returning to the family. The tension in the air became almost unbearable. The father leaned back in his seat, his face flushed with humiliation, while the mother looked away, clearly holding back tears. Their toddler clutched a stuffed animal tightly, his sniffles breaking the silence. "This is serious," Dana said, her frustration seeping into her tone. "I can't allow the plane to take off until this issue is resolved." At that moment, a voice from the back of the plane interrupted her. "I think you need to check your facts before accusing people." It was an older woman seated a few rows behind the family, her arms crossed and her tone icy. The passengers turned toward her, murmurs growing louder. "What are you implying?" Dana asked, narrowing her eyes. The woman tilted her head and gestured toward the galley at the front of the plane. "I saw a wallet earlier near the galley. Maybe you should check there before you start harassing families." Dana froze, her posture stiffening. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the area the woman had indicated. The murmurs in the cabin shifted to anticipation as Dana walked briskly toward the galley, her movements stiff and deliberate. Passengers craned their necks to watch as Dana began searching the galley area. Her hands moved quickly, opening compartments and shifting items around. The second flight attendant, who had been observing nearby, stepped closer. "What are you doing?" the second attendant asked, their tone firm but calm. "Looking for the wallet." Dana snapped. "A passenger said it might be back here." The second attendant frowned. "Did you check with the passenger who reported it missing? Are you sure it's even lost?" Dana waved off the question. "I'm handling it," she replied curtly. It wasn't long before her hand brushed against something wedged between two service trays. She pulled it out and stared at the small black wallet in her hand. Her face paled slightly as she confirmed the name on the ID inside matched the report. The second attendant let out a frustrated sigh. "You caused all that chaos for nothing," they said under their breath. "You owe those people an apology." Dana's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might argue. But the weight of the passengers' stares and her colleagues' disapproval left her no choice. She turned slowly, wallet in hand, and began the long walk back down the aisle. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder as Dana approached the family's row. The father sat up straighter, his expression shifting from anger to quiet triumph. The mother, still holding their toddler, stared at Dana with a mix of disbelief and cautious expectation. Stopping in front of them, Dana held out the wallet. Her tone was clipped, her words forced. "It was found near the galley," she said stiffly. "It seems there was a misunderstanding." The father's brow furrowed, and he let out a humorless laugh. "A misunderstanding," he said, his voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "You humiliate us in front of the entire plane. And now it's just a misunderstanding?" Dana opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, the second flight attendant stepped forward, their tone conciliatory. "We deeply regret the inconvenience this caused you," they said. "This shouldn't have happened, and we'll make sure to address it properly." The mother finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't just inconvenience us," she said, her eyes locking with Dana's. "You assumed the worst about us without even trying to think it through." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers nodded and murmured in agreement, their disapproval of Dana's actions now fully visible. Dana shifted uncomfortably, her posture rigid as the father added, "We'll be speaking to the airline about this." Without another word, Dana turned on her heel and walked back toward the galley, her face flushed with embarrassment. The family sat back in their seats, visibly shaken but relieved the ordeal was over. Nearby passengers offered quiet words of support, and the toddler, sensing the tension easing, let out a small giggle as he clutched his stuffed animal. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, one thing was clear: the consequences of that day were far from over.